All right, and we are live. It's the ITRBoxing weekend wrap up. It's your boy Dakota. I'm here with my guy Nibs. Nibs, what's good, bro? Hell of a weekend we just had.
Is one of the better weeks in boxing, baby. A lot of stuff to go over, man.
I mean, listen, we've got lengthy show notes this week, and we're just gonna jump right in. I see people starting to hop in the chat. Please, you guys are the third host. Feel free to leave comments. Um, let's get to the obvious. Let's get to the reason why I'm guessing most people are going to be watching us this week. Terence Crawford moving up from welterweight, and I want to emphasize moving up from welterweight because he had one fight at junior middleweight, moving up from welterweight to super middleweight to take on a consensus all-time great in Canelo Alvarez and winning a hard-fought but convincing and decisive unanimous decision over Canelo Alvarez in what can only really be described as an all-time great performance from an all-time great fighter. Nibs, what's been your feelings and reactions over the last few days since the fight?
I think that we got two of the best boxers, not only in our era, but in the history of boxing, that gave us a hell of a show, right? And I think that when you do it, first off, hats off to Bud Crawford for getting the dub, but again, hats off for Canelo for taking the fight. He didn't have to take this fight. He's Canelo. He, up until this point, and probably maybe even still afterwards, is the face of boxing, right? For most people, as far as pay per view goes, right? Box office, getting asses in seats. Canelo is by far the biggest draw in boxing, probably, and will probably still continue to be if he continues to box. But he doesn't have to prove anything, and I don't think this loss to Bud Crawford really tarnishes his legacy in any way. But to get into Bud, man, 42-0, you know what I mean? 31 knockouts, and no matter whether you like his style of fighting or boxing or not, you got to give the man his flowers. Undisputed in
Well, and who
three
the
weight
fuck would
classes.
that be? I mean, if someone was like, I don't like a Terence Crawford fight, I'm like, I don't know what to tell you then, bub.
Look, we have members of our own team that don't like Bud Crawford, and they shall remain nameless, right? But you know what I'm saying. Look, I don't get it. I really don't. Everybody that doesn't like him, but I will have to come out here and be 100% correct. It took a Hall of Famer to make me see the light. When we were interviewing James Toney, he was the one who told us, "Nah, man, Bud's like that." And I had to go back and really, really pay attention to what Bud was doing, and he was right. And I haven't picked against Bud since. I picked him to win this fight. I know a lot of people picked him to lose, but I said he's got all the tools you want in a fighter. And another thing, he didn't look like the smaller guy in the ring. They looked like equals in the ring size wise. It wasn't this big disparity in size. And he took Canelo's punches very well. I don't think anybody expected that either. I thought at some point he would get rocked. Didn't happen.
So I think that's a great point, Nibs, and that was ultimately for me the thing that had me leaning towards Canelo, as we talked about last week, was just, I didn't know if he was going to be able to hurt Terrence, but I just thought that his power would be a factor in the fight, be it that the body shots, which he landed beautifully, would start to add up and slow Terrence's pace, or that he'd be throwing something that would have Terrence a little gun shy. Just that in some way Canelo's power would be a factor in this fight. And it really wasn't. It was exclusively a tactical fight at that point. Once the reality set in that Canelo's punching power, Canelo's size, Canelo's physicality is not going to be a factor in this fight. It's going to be a tactical fight. And Canelo just came in second. Terrence had an answer for everything. The jab was a thing of beauty. He moved a lot more than I thought he was going to. And when they exchanged, it was very even. And it was just, it was really a masterclass, bro. He took so many risks in this fight, not just to his legacy and to his career, but to his fucking health, to move up 21 pounds in the last 2 years to take on the best fighter of his era. It's as far as singular performances, it's hard to find one that really compares. The one we used for context last week was Bernard Hopkins moving up 2 weight classes after losing to JT. and getting the dominant decision over Tarver. But I think that this even kind of surpasses that as at least as an individual fight because of Canelo's place in the sport. Not that Tarver wasn't a top pound for pound guy, but Canelo's the face of a generation and the face of a nation.
I think it's telling when you know, just like you said, Bud had he had a cup of coffee with 154. He had what, 2 3 fights at 147. Before that, he was 140 and below. We're talking about a guy who started his career on 130 pounds. Canelo probably ain't been 130 pounds since he was 10. You know what I mean? Like, Canelo's been fighting at 168 his past, what, 13, 14 fights. That's his weight, and he looks comfortable at 168. He looked okay at 154 and 160, but he looks comfortable at 168. I don't know if there's anybody else at 168 that really gives him too many problems, right? The last time he had a serious challenge, he fought one of the best fighters of another great fighter, right, at 175, arguably the best 175 pounder in the business. Flip a coin, right, between him, Beevil, and Beterbiev, right? And he came out unscathed, although he did take a loss. He didn't. He never looked like he was hurt, right? Never looked like he was discouraged. He comes in against Bud and has no answers, no answers, zero. Was it? But it was entertaining. He never shied away. Bud never shied away. They gave us a good fight. It wasn't just one sided.
That may be, yeah, that may be. I felt like Canelo did have answers. The problem was Terence always has an answer for your answer. And so he's winning every exchange like 2-1. You know what I mean? He makes the first and the third move. And Canelo, I felt like, did beautiful body work. He made the fight. He made the ring small enough for Terence that he was able to get off offense. And it just didn't have any real impact. And to see Terence build his body up that successfully, I think is also not really getting enough credit. Not just that he won the fight, but just that he was able to perform with the extra weight that he's never had to perform with. Just everything about it, bro. I mean, we could go on all fucking day. The only thing I'll say is that as great as Canelo is, and still is, by the way, I know people, I've seen the take that like Canelo's washed and so this win doesn't mean anything. That shit pisses me off. But if there's anything Canelo doesn't do great anymore, it's combination punching, right? He's a little bit one and done. He kind of sits down on a good one and then he keeps it moving. And that type of volume, that type of variety, even if the punch variety is good, it just wasn't going to be enough to keep up with Terence, who always had an answer, can and has always been able to do a little of this and a little of that. And it felt like at least that Canelo not only was coming in second, but that by the end of the fight, he really did run out of answers. You could see that frustration on him. You could see that little head shake he did with like, what the fuck is that? You know what I mean? He looked frustrated. He looked confused. He looked like a guy who had run out of answers. And to force another legend to feel that way, it takes a special kind of guy.
My answer to the people that say that, Canelo is washed, right? It's laughable to even say it out loud. Let's take that for a second, right? Okay, his last fight against William Skull, nobody's gonna give you shit for saying that's a bad fight, whatever, right? But before that, he fought Edgar Berlanga, Jaime Munguia, Jamil Charlo, and John Ryder, right? All of those guys were considered, near the top of the division when they fought this guy, or contenders of some sort. Uh, and then Gennady Golovkin. His last loss was again to Dmitry Bivol. Where in that is washed, right? He's never he hasn't been knocked down since his early days, right? And post Floyd, he's probably been one of the best boxers we had. Not just the face of, not just a popular guy. He's been
I
one
mean,
of the best.
cumulatively, there's an easy argument to say that Canelo Alvarez is the most significant fighter of the post Floyd era. I think that's an easy argument to make.
Who can argue with you? And again, even if he is, people are talking about he's washed. 63-3, bro. Your three losses are to three first ballot Hall of Fame fighters. Anybody who doesn't like Canelo needs to sit down and shut the fuck up. That's my opinion. And then you take the guy who beat that guy, right? He beat the face of boxing. He beat the guy that everybody thought was untouchable. Nobody really gave him, outside of the true boxing fans, gave him any shot. There's probably no casual fan who thought he had a shot. And, I'm here to tell you, I live in Tucson, Arizona, bro. Every person in town, all the Mexicans here were crying. But I'm here to tell you, bro. Omaha, Nebraska, stand up. You got you a legend.
It's so tough to tell what's going to be next for both of these guys, right? Like they asked Terence in the ring if he's going to fight again. He doesn't know. Of course he doesn't know. He just finished the most important fight of his career 10 minutes ago. And, Canelo has kind of been there and done that, right? In terms of what you can do in the sport of boxing. There's always more you can do. And it feels like, I think the closest comparison I've been able to come up with is Manny Pacquiao. And part of what's made Manning great is how he responds from losses. And a lot of his most iconic moments have come on the heels of defeat, and is Canelo going to have one of those moments? I don't know. He's certainly not obligated, right? There's nothing left for him to prove in a 20-year career at 35 years old. There's definitely nothing left for Terence to do. But what do you think both of these guys would or should do next, in your opinion?
The easy answer is whatever the fuck they want to, and especially more so for Canelo than Bud. I know I said this in our chat that Bud has earned the right to do whatever he wants, but I think you can say that tenfold for Canelo. Canelo can literally do whatever the hell he wants at this point, and I'm not going to be mad at it. I don't care if he fights another no-name guy, right? To just kind of just make another payday. I don't, if he wants to try to be great and fight, 175 again, great. If he wants to make, the Benavidez fight finally to shut people up, great. If he wants to retire, great. I think no matter what he does next, it's going to be okay. For Bud, I think it's a little bit different because I think people are expecting now for him to do, some Superman type stuff and, move up again or, fight, the someone unrealistic, right? Or now people are talking about, getting Mayweather out of retirement to fight him. Floyd Mayweather is damn near 50 years old, and he hasn't fought professionally, and God knows when. Could now, with that being said, could Floyd come back and probably beat the field at welterweight? Probably, you know what I mean? Because he's just got that natural talent. But fighting Bud at this point in his career would just not. It wouldn't make any sense. But again, I think it's one of those things where he could do whatever the hell he wants, and we should be okay with it.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think it seems more likely that Terence will retire after this than Canelo, just because it feels like maybe for Terence, he just got denied for so long, denied access to the big fights, denied access to the big fan base, denied access to the big checks. And it's all kind of accumulated into this significant moment for him. And it would be a perfect moment for him to ride off into the sunset. And I've been thinking about kind of what his seat at the table is with all the greats. We were talking about this on the phone off air the other night. And I feel like it's going to take some time, at least for me, to kind of process what the long-term scope of his legacy is. But it's undeniable that he has a seat at the table with all of the greats of any era. And that eras change. Certain periods of boxing are different, and everyone's resume breaks down different. But that even with, I think, for me, the biggest holdup being there's probably a smaller number of signature wins for Bud than there is for other legends. The totality of his career, without a doubt, gives him a seat at the table.
Here's where I disagree. And the reason I disagree with that is because we're talking about a dude who is a three-time unified champion, right? So there's significant wins up and down his resume. The thing that gives his resume some people get pause on it is because what happened to the guys he fought after he fought them, right? But when he was fighting these people, they were the creme de la creme. He beats them, and they might have fallen off a cliff. But is that his fault? You know what I mean? I think, to me, if you put Bud on your Mount Rushmore of boxing greats, I'm not arguing with you.
Yeah, I think, and a lot of what happened was not entirely under his control. When Bud Crawford was fighting guys like Kavaliauskas, who was a fantastic fighter, the welterweight division was really hot. And there was at the time Errol Spence, there was Keith Thurman, there was Sean Porter, there was Danny Garcia, there was still Pacquiao, there was Ugas, and none of those up until the Spence fight were fights that he was able to be included in because of promotional divides in the sport. And really, it seemed mostly like PBC siloing him into a separate thing where he couldn't be a part of this, this class of welterweights that was so exciting. And in order to make up for that, he had to do something very extreme. And so he moved up 3 divisions and took on the best fighter of his era and won. And I think makes up for a lot of the wins that he wasn't able to earn. Can't quite tell if we lost Nibs or not. He looks a little bit frozen. I do believe we also had another third host in the dog jump in. But I guess my closing thoughts on this fight, like Nibs said, whatever these guys want to do next, I think they're perfectly entitled to. And one thing that I've been thinking about, I think it's worth floating out there. I hope they do it again. It seems unlikely that they will, but we talk about, like, is boxing a business? If boxing was a business, I have no doubt that these two guys would run it again. Because why wouldn't you, right? It was a good fight. It was relatively close. It was very competitive, and it made a lot of money. And so when I look at a matchup like that, it also is potentially an opportunity to create, a really great rivalry, which we don't always get, and we don't get as often in boxing these days. It's part of what's so impressive about Usyk is his willingness and his ability to not just take a hard challenge, but then to double down and do it again. And that I think that it would be a great rivalry. We're getting a message from Nibs that he's been kicked out of the stream. Pretty sure he should use the same link. Apologize for the technical difficulties, folks. In the meantime, what we will do is we will start moving on to the undercard until Nibs jumps back on. An undercard that, frankly, I think on paper was like a little bit overwhelming for a fight of this magnitude. We've, grown accustomed over the last few generations, strong co-main events really helping to anchor a card. Callum Walsh getting a unanimous decision over Fernando Vargas Jr. A lot wider, I think, than of scorecards than I expected. I thought Fernando fought a pretty good fight for a guy with so much less experience. I thought he won, anywhere between 2 and 4 rounds. And there was certain rounds where it felt like he was actually making Callum Walsh really uncomfortable. And as much as I like Walsh, I've covered some of his fights in the past, and I've met him in person, but there just wasn't a wow factor on this one. It was just kind of a good, solid workman-like performance, but also a fight where he's taking on a guy, like we said, who started late in boxing, who's so much less experience. I think people were expecting a more dominant and showy outing, and what they got was closer to like a 60-40. And I think that part of what doomed this fight from jump was making it a co-main event on a card like this. It's not really a fight that was worthy of that. And I think, the primary reason for that being that Callum Walsh has been fighting in the main events of 360 promotions cards on UFC Fight Pass. And as Dana White, pushes his way into the sport of boxing, and we're going to talk about that later, that's a piece of that, right? He's been fighting on the UFC Fight Network. And so he was, taken out of that, that system and put into the co-main event on this one. What really deserved to be the co-main event was Christian and Billy in a draw with Lester Martinez. Hell of a fight in that one. Fight of the year type of contender from start to finish. The draw, was a perfectly appropriate result. I don't think anybody was mad at that. For everything and Billy brought, Lester always had an answer. And a lot of people might not have known who Lester Martinez was. If they knew who Billy was, it was less likely that they knew who Lester Martinez was. And Lester was coming off a knockout win over Joshawn James, a win over Caleb Plant. I mean, this was a really, really dangerous guy that I think, though unranked, presented one of the bigger challenges in Billy's career. And was just tremendous, man. I mean, he was great in the pocket. He was a good counter puncher, and Billy's one of those guys. He's got an engine. He's got a real engine on him, and it's going to be difficult, really, for anybody to keep pace with him. And somehow Lester was able to do it, even with Billy, on the front foot. He only was only throwing fastballs, right? It was all hard shots, all hard, fast shots. And Lester was able to kind of find an answer at every turn and created, probably the most exciting action fight of the night. If not for the fight preceding it on YouTube in the prelims, which was Brandon Adams winning the rematch against Serhii Boachuk, which maybe you didn't know that those guys had fought, right? Because Boachuk has been in the spotlight. He had a great fight with Virgil, very close fight with Virgil, had a hell of a fight with Brian Mendoza. Boachuk's been in the limelight now at junior middle for the last couple of years, and Adams has been plagued with inactivity, has had a couple of close decision losses that have kept him kind of just out of the realm of like top 10 fights, and unfortunately just not in the ring enough. All by myself, guys. I gotta fucking take a sip, you know what I mean? And so I think the thinking was, okay, Adams won this first fight, but the issue for him is going to be that the momentum has kind of been going in the opposite direction in the 4 years since their first fight, really going well for Boachuk and sort of stagnating for Adams. And Brandon Adams kind of dominated the fight, guys. He kind of gave Serhii Boachuk a boxing lesson on a hard inside fight that was entertaining every single round. Every single round, this was a hard fight. Where Boachuk was just coming in second. It wasn't like in Billy and Martinez where the scoring seemed a little more uncertain. This was clear cut. Adams was throwing the cleaner, harder shots that just seemed to have more impact. It never felt like Boachuk landed anything that had Adams bothered or shaken. And at times it felt like everything Adams was landing was pushing Boachuk back, was hurting him, was taking the steam out of his shots. And it was a great win for a really underrated, underappreciated guy who hasn't gotten the love at 154 that maybe he deserves, with tremendous wins over Boachuk prior to this, winning the kind of the reboot of the Contender Series, beating Shane Mosley Jr. in the finals, fighting on ESPN many times back in the Friday night fight days. And he's a guy who's fought across multiple eras. He's a guy who's been relevant in multiple eras, and hopefully with a win like this on a platform like this, it can at least lead to something truly meaningful for him at 154, if that's a title shot, if it's just being a main event and getting the kind of recognition, that he deserves. And I think he's probably deserved it for a while. And it was funny. a friend of the program, Lucas Cattell, asked us on air one week. He was like, "Who, if you had to make a music comparison, who's Brandon Adams?" And the comparison I used was Lupe Fiasco, because I know how good he is, and you don't get to see him all the time. You go long periods of time, without a release, and every once in a while he kind of drops a dud on you, right? And if the only time you saw Brandon Adams was against Charlo, you might go, I don't know about this guy. But if you watch every single other one of his fights, you kind of know what his merit is. But he'll drop a dud on you now and then, and he has over the years a couple of times. But really deserving of a bigger opportunity at this point. Not too sure. We lost our guy Nibs here, and now I'm on an island, and I'm just gonna keep going until we get through everything we were gonna do this week. Unfortunately, I think that overshadowed in all of that was Naoya Inoue in Japan just several hours after the ending of this fight, winning a wide unanimous decision over MJ Akhmadaliev. And it was Akhmadaliev, to me, kind of represented the last great challenge for him at 122 pounds. He's already kind of gone through the top guys, right? He's beaten Luis Neri. He's beaten Stephen Fulton. He's taken every big challenge that there's been at 122 pounds since he moved up. And to me, Akhmadaliev represented the most versatile, adaptable, seasoned champion available, and maybe that Inoue had ever fought. I thought pretty highly of MJ. I've always kind of enjoyed his style, how versatile he is. And Inoue, much like Terence Crawford, was just able to make Akhmadaliev come in second. And as much as Akhmadaliev would have his pushes and have his offensive moments and make his stands, Inoue, between the footwork, the punching power, the unpredictability, everything about him right now still kind of screams that he's one of the best in the game. And I've seen the take, and many people that, I respect in the sport have said that they think he's slowing down. And I just don't see it, man. I really just don't see it. I see a guy who's been taking on nothing but killers for the last couple of years in a weight class that's not necessarily natural to him, or not somewhere that he's fought, for the duration of his career leading up to it. And I just think what he's doing is incredible, man. I think that had it not been on the same night as this, and frankly, and it's the thing, one of the things that I love about him is that he fights for the Japanese people, man. He fights for the Japanese people. He fights at a time that's convenient for them. And with the state of boxing today, right, Top Rank doesn't have a streaming deal. Things are in transition. We don't know where Top Rank kind of falls as the cards start to fall in the restructuring of the game. And so this was on a Facebook page. This was on the Top Rank Facebook page. This had no broad streaming deal, when it was clearly, a highly athletically significant fight that deserved that kind of exposure and that kind of attention. It had been weeks since Nibs and I had been able to cover a fight of the magnitude of Inoue and Akhmadaliev. It's been a real dead period in the sport. And I hope that he's a guy who's able to get his flowers for an audience outside of Japan in a real meaningful way. I know boxing people know, that he's one of the best that the game has to offer. But I hope for him, and for all the fans who maybe have been deprived of watching him, that they're able to get that access, that they don't have to wake up at 3:00 in the morning to watch one of the 5 best fighters on the planet fight. And I'm working on a written piece now that you guys will be able to check out tomorrow. Include some thoughts and quotes from people all around the sport, championship fighters, commentators, etc. I think you guys will really enjoy that. But these two guys fighting hours apart this weekend kind of brings to the question of, they're not going to be around forever. Neither of these guys are going to be around forever. Crawford is probably coming to the end. If he's not there, he's probably getting close. And in a way, I think the best way of putting it, has way more of his career behind him than ahead of him, right? The whole landscape of the sport is going to be changing very shortly, guys. I'm not even talking about the business. I'm just talking about the fighters right now. With Crawford potentially retiring, with Inoue certainly being, in the back portion of his career, Canelo in the back portion of his career, Usyk starting to approach, 40 years old, the landscape of the pound for pound discussion is going to change. Oh, we got him back, baby. We got him back. There he is.
Hey, having some technical difficulties, so I'm on my phone right now.
Hey, listen, bro. Technical difficulties was never enough to keep us off the air. And best believe, I've been holding down the fort for the last 10 minutes, brother. Best
I bet
believe.
you.
I'm
Oh,
scratchy
already.
just I'm scratchy just talking about it. So I've given sort of a lot of the bullet points on the X's and O's of the week, right? Went through Lester Martinez and then Billy, went through, the fact that frankly Callum Walsh and Fernando Vargas Jr., as good of a fight as it was, and as much as I like both of those young guys, not a co-main of a card of this magnitude, not worthy of that. In my opinion, I think in a lot of people's opinion, and very obviously put there because Callum Walsh has been fighting on UFC Fight Pass as a part of 360 Promotions. Brandon Adams getting a stunner over Boachuk. I mean, that was a real fucking stud of a performance. And then breaking down Inoue and Akhmadaliev. Just give me your thoughts on, outside of Crawford and Canelo and Inoue and Akhmadaliev, stood out for you or that you'd like to highlight?
So for me, the on that card, the Bud and Canelo card, for me it was Adams was the performance of the night. And not only does he look the part, like he looks like he should be a fighter in a movie, right? Like, you know, he's on my my dream board as far as what I want to look like when I grow up. But then you take into consideration that the first time out he was actually losing the fight, the first fight that they had, and then ended up getting a knockout. But this time I thought it was not only good action both ways, but I thought he was in control the entire time. I never thought that he was ever in really any serious trouble. But I'll be damned if they didn't give us another fighter of the year contender, bro. Like, I mean, it was high IQ Rock'em Sock'em Robots. You know what I mean? And it was one of those fights where you're like, yo, if I had to watch just that fight 10 times in a row, sign me up. And that's the surprise. Like you
Right.
got that fight, and I felt like after watching it, I said this should have been the co-main event.
Well, and it definitely should have been a part of the Netflix televised portion. I mean, that
Yeah,
was kind of wild to me, was that Walsh and Vargas would be the co-main slot and that fight would be on a YouTube prelim. I love that they put the prelims on YouTube, by the way. I understand why they can't put 8 hours of boxing on Netflix all day. I understand that. But it felt like that fight, just on the stakes of it. And traditionally, Nibs, correct me if I'm wrong, but generally speaking, on a card like this, you get 3 or 4 undercard fights, to kind of help service the main event. And it felt like that was one that just got overlooked.
I feel like, and again, just like you said, I get the agenda with Walsh, I get the agenda with Vargas, and I said this before the fight. I said I think that you know Vargas gets a bad rap because of who his brother is, right? Like his let's face it, of the fighting Vargas boys, Emiliano is the creme de la creme. And you could argue that Junior is actually like the third, of the three in talent, right? And I think that with that being said, though, I thought he accounted himself well. He didn't, get embarrassed. He didn't embarrass the
I
family.
thought he was great, bro. I really I was impressed with not just his boxing skills, which were better than I expected. He's got a good
Hmm.
jab. He's got good feet. He's a pretty good defensive fighter, right? He's got some good defensive instincts.
Yeah,
I was impressed with his poise, right? Because he's a guy, he was the first. He wasn't the first of the brothers to start, but he's the oldest of the brothers. And I
Right.
think him having started late, there was certain things he was doing instinctually that looked like a guy with more experience. And I think that was at least the part from him that I was really impressed with.
I still think it was a slight early in his career from him to be on this stage. You know what I mean? As a
Yeah.
co-main event. And I think the opponent was a little bit too much. But I will say this though. I think he'll learn from this, and if anything, we know his pops is going to get him right. Like you know, his pops is getting his boys together. But I'll say that you know, I wasn't overly impressed with Walsh. I was actually more impressed with Vargas than I was Walsh.
Yeah,
And
he
he's the
never
guy who
got
won the
out of
fight.
second gear. He really never got out of second gear. He won the fight off of being more accurate, being more precise, having a little bit more power. And ultimately, that's where the experience plays out. You could see it took less effort for him to do stuff in the ring than it took for Fernando. And that was the decider. But I think the thinking was that, you know, hey, listen, you know, you're a storied amateur. This guy's been boxing for like 10 years. You should be smoking this guy. That was the expectation, I think, from a lot of people. And he didn't satisfy that, even though it was a fun and good fight to watch. I just don't think anybody was particularly wowed by him.
I just feel like it shouldn't have been the co-main event. As a matter of fact,
No.
be honest with you, on a fight of this magnitude, usually you get this this kind of fight as the opener, if at all. Like, or this would have been the main event of the prelims, right? This would have been the main prelim fight, and then we would have got, you know, Brad Hernandez, you know, and Jurczyk late, you know, on in their slot. But you know, again, they're pushing. You know, promotions are what they are. They're pushing a certain guy. You know, he, like you said, he's, you know, he's the promoter's guy. So you know, what are you going to do? But I think that this goes to prove, hey man, he's got some work to do if he's going to be prime time. Because if
Nibs,
you're having problems with the third most talented Vargas brother, where you know, what do you do from here?
right. What does it say about your trajectory or what your goals are in the sport as somebody who but that's part of, you know, he's been able to be like a big fish in a little pond a little bit in this early
Mhm.
part of his career. I really like 360 Promotions and what they're doing, you know, in New York City specifically, because that's where they're staging a lot of their fights. I love what they're doing. But he's had the experience of very early in his career consistently being a main event fighter. And so I think the expectation is once we drop you into the deep end, you're going to be ready to go because you've already been, you know, the opening band for the night. And that just wasn't how it played out.
You know what they say about the you know, best laid plans, right? So you know, look, on paper, like you said, on paper, he should have washed Fernando Vargas Jr. We shouldn't even be having a conversation of, you know, the things we liked that Vargas was able to do even in his loss. But here we are. He should have gotten knocked out, right, by Walsh. On paper, that's what this would have told you. But be honest with you, I don't know if it was so much that Fernando Vargas is so much better than we thought he is, or it's just Walsh isn't as good as
Well,
we thought he was.
he is better than I thought he was, for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
I have no issue saying that. Just purely on like, how do you do in a 10-round fight? You never been past the seventh. Like there was a bunch of boxes that he checked for me that other prospects would have to check. You know what I'm saying? That he did
right.
check. So for me, Fernando did overperform, but it was on Walsh to make the adjustment to say, hey, you know, this guy's in it for the long haul, to kind of make either a switch in tactic or a switch in intensity.
I just don't know if he's got it in him, you know, when the level of competition goes up. Because you know, let's put it this way: what do you do with your next fight when you get somebody that's supposed to be on your level or higher? You know what I mean? Because you got to start making these contender fights, right? You know, this was kind of the last of the kitty gloves fights that you can really have. You know what I mean? And that's no disrespect to Fernando Jr., But let's face it, he's not at the contender level. You know what I mean? So what are you going to do when you start fighting these guys that real contenders should be fighting? You know what I mean? If you had trouble with the guy, and maybe styles make fights. Maybe he gets in there against somebody, who's more his speed. But at the same time, bro, again, I just wasn't. It wasn't a ringing endorsement. Like if this was the first time I had watched Walsh fight, I'd have been like, they're hyped about this guy, really? Okay. It just would have made me really lukewarm. So, hopefully, he does bounce back and he comes back and he does something great. And then, we'll forget about this performance.
Well, and they kept kind of trying to sell the point of like, well, the reason he's here is because Dana really likes him. Dana really thinks he's really special. And if you needed an initial indicator that maybe Dana's not quite on the pulse of what is going on in boxing or what the fans want, there's your first indication. We'll get into some of that in a little bit, but Nibs, real quick, while I run and get some water, give the people your initial thoughts and feelings about Inoue's performance over MJ Akhmadaliev. Hell of a fight, and another dominant win from Inoue. And also, what do you think about this still? Having a deal and a fight of this magnitude with fighters of this quality winding up on a Facebook page. And I'll be back in about 60 seconds.
Yeah, so I've got a mixed feeling about the Facebook fight. I think that really you can argue it in a ways on his behalf because he's fighting in Japan. So I don't know if the fight was on Facebook in Japan. I don't know if they have like a different network that it was streaming on or that it was available on over there. But making it available, over here on Facebook, I guess the problem with it for me is I'm not going to Facebook for my sports, right? Like I had to find out that it was on Facebook for me to even watch the fight. One, but you mean to tell me we've got one of the you know most talented boxers of our generation, and no network wanted to pick him up. No Amazon Prime, no Netflix, no YouTube Premium, somebody couldn't come along, throw him a bag, and be like, hey, let's put this on our network. Because let's face it, he's pound for pound, probably in the top 3 or 4 fighters on just about anybody you ask's list. So the fact that his fight ends up on Facebook makes you scratch your head and some other parts of your body too. Look, um, in a way, is almost he's in a dangerous position because he makes it look so easy that it's at a point now where people might be get a little bored with it, right? Like, oh well, we've gotten accustomed to him just beating up on people, right? They wanted a little bit of drama. And the problem with being as great as he is, there's really not a lot of drama in his fights. He might get dropped every now and again. You know what I'm saying? Because of how aggressive he is. But as soon as he gets dropped, he comes back and completely dominates the fight. So,
It's kind of like LeBron,
that's
right?
what
Where like LeBron, you could always make a case for LeBron being MVP of the league pretty much every year. And so because they do it consistently, it almost gets underappreciated. Like you just take for granted that this person is great and is like heads above everyone around them. And sometimes Inoue suffers from that. But to me, the big thing for him is not having exposure outside of Japan, which has proven to not necessarily be a priority of his. And I kind of respect that. I respect that local boxing supported him. And so he, makes sure he shows up for those people. And I love that about him. But between the inconvenient times for everybody else and not having a streaming deal, it doesn't seem like he's being appreciated by the boxing public the way he deserves to be.
And my point to that, when you went and got your water break was this, bro. Like, let's be really clear. If Inoue was fighting in the States, right, there'd be all kind of networks, getting up. He would have gotten on there somewhere. I think because he does fight in Japan, right? It you do almost kind of have to give the Facebook thing a slide in his case, because it's like, well, does anybody else, really, or can they put it on at that time slot that, he's going to be fighting, and it'll be the time that the fight is going on here. A lot of times when he fights, most Americans are sleeping. You know what I mean? Like, we get his fights usually on what, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and they're at like, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. People haven't, your average fan isn't going to wake up at 3 or 4 o'clock on a Tuesday when they got to be at work at 6, to watch his fight. So at least I could appreciate the fact that, hey, at least this time we got it on a Sunday, a day where, as a boxing fan, I didn't have to do anything else but watch anyway.
Well, I think that's a good segue into this portion of our show, which is that, Top Rank still doesn't have a streaming deal. There doesn't see, at least in terms of public information, there isn't any speculation or promise that a deal is in development or that, something is happening. We just don't know anything. And so we don't want to make any assumptions. But one thing I've speculated, I'm not assuming, I'm speculating, is that part of the challenge for them right now is, who does the company build around? What are the fighters that are exclusive to them that they can go to a network and say, hey, we got some big fights coming for you? And it starts to get trickier, when a lot of the fighters are moving over to Riyadh season or becoming Ring Magazine ambassadors that were once with Top Rank. And now, especially, with them not having dates and having, a place for their guys to get viewed, like, where do they go as a company? It just seems like they've put themselves in a difficult spot. And if Inoue, who in terms of skill is the fighter that you're saying we're going to build our company around this guy, there's going to have to be some changes, to how he interfaces with the fan base.
I mean, one of the best deals they had was that ESPN deal they struck, all those years back, which effectively ended Friday night fights. But because it became, hey, this is our guys we're putting on, right? And to their credit, they put on some great cards. Like, their time with ESPN was great. But you mean to tell me you couldn't rework something out? That was a lucrative deal, I felt, for both sides, and I think it was something that they could have built on. You know what I mean? Because let's face
clearly ESPN, the ESPN side didn't feel like it was worth it to them. And like I said, the more that Riyadh season, Turkey Al Sheikh, TKO poach from the other promoters and offer them something that nobody else can offer them, as a company, what do you say to a streamer? Hey, you're not feeling like this is worth it, and it's only going to get less worth it.
I think you have to come up with your own way, right? That where there's a will, there's a way, right? I mean, YouTube is still out there. People, YouTube Premium, something.
We
You know
talk
what I
about
mean?
ProBox, right? ProBox makes it real easy for us to be fans because it's just on YouTube for anyone to watch.
There you go. And if nobody is going to come to you, then you've got to come to them, right? Meet people where they're at, right? So, if people are watching on Facebook, if people are watching on Instagram, if people are only turning into YouTube, Netflix, you know what I mean? Get a deal somewhere, and then more to your point about who Top Rank is going to sell as their guy, right? I don't think they have that guy right now. I think that they're going to have to find that guy
That's a great
because,
point.
like you said, I mean, love or hate where the money comes from, the Turk can pay a lot more money than everybody else, right? And he can pay it a lot more consistently, and he can put you probably, if you're a younger guy, he can probably put you in the ring with somebody nobody else is willing to put you in the ring with, you know what I mean, for the payday that you want, and he can put you on a platform where you're going to be seen by a lot of eyes. So win, lose, or draw, it's a win-win either way. So and yeah, as Top Rank or pretty much any other promotion, are you going to be able to pay what the Turk can? No, you've already got to, take that out of there. But you also then have to do something for your fighters, you know, more consistently, promote them more, Be more excited about all the guys on your roster, right? Make them all feel like superstars.
Well, and start building around some of the young talent that they have, the Troy Isleys, the Jahai Tuckers. You know, there's young talent that's still exclusive to them that I feel like could be, you know, listen, things are changing, bro, right? Like we've been talking about this for weeks now. Things are changing in the sport. And some of it is good change. But some of it I think is not going to be good change. And as a company, it just seems like them, PBC, and I use them specifically, and MVP, because those are companies that have not crossed over and done business with Riyadh season. I think because they've seen what the result was for Matchroom and for Golden Boy. We do business with these guys. They come in as a partner and then create their own promotion separate and take all our guys, right? So they've already seen the writing on the wall there in terms of how those two major promotions have, you know, suffered from this restructuring. So I think you're right. The idea of who do they build around, it's like they haven't found that guy. And what the product needs to be is the future of boxing, right? Right before you came back on the air, I was talking about how much, even in like a year, the pound for pound list is going to be different because Usyk, Canelo, Crawford, Inoue, are all kind of on the back nine a little bit. You know what I mean? Like they're not going to be around forever. The game is changing, not just in terms of the business, but in terms of who's going to be the faces of the sport.
I mean, it reminds me of the you know, not so distant future when Floyd, Pacquiao, you know, Mosley, all those guys were either at the top or pretty much the pound for pound list, right? When they left, you know, it was a whole new list, right? I think you're looking at an exodus in the next couple of years where, yeah, you're right. Everybody in the top 10 is going to be a brand new face because, you know, let's face it, you know, whether he wants to fight, continue to fight or not, Bud could retire right now. Canelo could retire right now. They all have that option. They don't need the money. You know, Usyk, he doesn't need to prove himself by any means, you know, anymore. You know, but then you even look at the guys at the bottom of the list, like, you know, the Shakur Stevensons, even though he's a young guy, he's been in for a while, right? He's probably got, you know, if he's got a couple of more years in him at the top. And then what happens when some of these guys start fighting each other?
And then what happened, you know, and then, you know, the guy that was supposed to be the post Mayweather in, you know, star in Tank Davis is no longer like a serious boxer.
Yeah, I mean, it's rough for me to talk about Tank because I think the world of him as a fighter, but I think he's got so many issues going on outside of boxing that he's got to figure that out before he steps back into the ring again. You know, I think he needs to get his personal life in order before, you know, he gets to boxing because, you know, and he needs to refine his passion for it. I don't think Tank is as anywhere near as passionate for boxing as he has been in a long time. So, you know, we'll see where that happens. But talent wise, yeah, he's probably one of the greats, and he's still box office. He's probably next to Canelo, the biggest draw in boxing right now. With that being said, you know, who's next all really depends on who who can beat the best out there. And
But also, Nibs, I got to
we'll
be
see.
honest, I think it's going to come down to who gets the opportunities because the game is changing, right? And I think breaking down some of what that change is for people who are mild to moderate boxing fans can be helpful. If you were just tuning in for this Crawford and Canelo thing and you're going, well, why is Dana White ringside? You're right. He's not generally ringside for boxing matches. That's the head of the UFC. That's a guy who's created a sporting empire of his own in another sport. You know, what's he doing over here? And what he's trying to do, I think, and it's becoming more and more obvious, he's trying to create the same type of monopoly, the same type of dominant league in boxing as is in the UFC. How is he trying to do that? Well, what he's said, this is not me quoting for him, but what he said is that he as TKO Promotions will sort of function as like a developmental league that will then go up to Ring Magazine Riyadh season promoted, main event type cards. How else are they interfacing with the rest of the sport? Well, frankly, he's doing everything he can in the States to get rid of the Ali Act, which is a really important thing for fight fans to understand how this protects your favorite fighters in terms of transparency amongst promoters, sanctioning bodies that are given rankings, managers, all of those entities the fighters are protected by in that piece of legislation. Why do they want to get rid of that? Well, they want to get rid of that so that they can have UFC style rankings, right? Where there's a UFC, there's a TKO league belt that is ranked exclusively kind of on the whims of Dana without like a criteria, the way the belt organizations have to have a set of criteria. Again, our system is very much imperfect, but there's reasons for why those things exist. And these are guys who would like to come in and kind of change all that up and kind of throw all that out the window and start over. I think there's some good things that they did here, right? Like we got a really great card on Netflix that we didn't have to pay extra money for. How much we've been talking about pay-per-views for the last 5 years. But I do think that creating that kind of a monopoly in boxing, particularly like we said, with maybe 5 of the best guys in the sport, starting to wrap it up a little bit here, it leaves the whole sport, I think, up in the air and sort of like a giant question mark. And particularly, I'm gonna let you jump in for a sec. I know there's been a long ass ramble, but after Eric Raskin on Boxing Scene dropping his piece about their inability to be credentialed for Riyadh season TKO fights, they're going to start to have real power and control over what gets seen and who gets seen and who gets to talk and who gets to talk about what. And it's a weird time and a weird transition we're in right now as a sport, man.
Look, I think a monopoly in any sport, competitive sport, is a bad thing for obvious reasons, especially in boxing because it can be highly predatory, right? The Ali Act and the rules and regulations that are set in boxing now. I know a lot of people think they're laughable, but they are there for a reason. You now have to pay these people what they're worth. That's not something you had to do back in the day, right? Guys were barely making enough money to put food on the table after one fight, after going life and death. Um, some guys were fighting for free because they owed debts to, the mob or whoever it was, and it wasn't a lot. We're not even talking lots of money. We're talking about, but now guys are getting paid. They're getting paid what they're worth. They're getting better health care. They're getting the freedom to be able to fight who they want, when they want, the ability to make money off of your own sweat and blood is a lot higher than it once was. Now you have a team that wants to come in and says, okay, cool, but we want you to fight. You're going to fight who we say. You're going to fight when we say. You're going to fight for how much we say. We want to be able to control the complete narrative. Not only do we want to control the fights, we want to control who gets to talk about the fights, who gets to report on the fights, how the fights get watched, etc. I just don't see that as being a good thing, bro. And I hope with everything in me that doesn't go down.
Listen, I mean, the article that Eric Raskin posted, I encourage everybody to go watch that and support Boxing Scene in general. I think they do some of the best coverage in all of boxing as a whole. But part of what he was talking about was like Lance Pugmire couldn't get credentialed for this fight. And he was a guy that was reporting in Ring Magazine when I was a kid. He's a well-known, entity in the sport. The idea that you wouldn't have him at one of your big fights or that you wouldn't want to have Boxing Scene at one of your big fights is almost like laughable. Hopefully we get Nibs back in here for the last couple of minutes, man. We've been having technical difficulties is unbeaten this week, folks. I just bring all this up, because I think a lot of boxing fans do care about the fighters. They do have that connection to their fighters. And when Nibs talks at the end of the week about support local boxing, a lot of times those fans, right, your local homegrown fan base is what gets you to the big stage. And those are the people that really care about the fighters. And when we see, like Nibs was saying, these entities come in and try to create that type of monopoly. Listen, one of the things that the Ali Act protects fighters from, right? You talked about rankings, right? Rankings are a big piece of that, but the other big piece of that is no promoter can sign a fighter and basically say you have to commit to a long-term contract in order to commit to this fight. That's not legal, right? You can make the option to sign 1-fight deals. You can sign a 2-fight deal. That deal is up for negotiation. But no, there's no promoter that can say, listen, if you want to fight in this fight, you got to stay with us for 5 years. That's the other piece that they'd like to get rid of, guys. So once they get rid of that piece, they can sign fighters and put them into longer-term contracts that then continues to phase out other promoters in the sport who, listen, the multi-promotion system in boxing has been incredibly flawed. And I think a conversation about what can be done to make it better, I've been having them for 20 fucking years, but it just, this to me, and the way he responded to Sean Zettel on during the press conference, which we posted on the ITRBoxing Instagram page, it just doesn't give you hope or doesn't give you optimism that this isn't going to be successful for them.
It's one of those things where, it's an old adage, money talks, and we all know what everything else is doing. So, look, when you've got basically an endless stream of finances to be able to make things happen, you can get a lot done, right? And I think that's where it's coming from. But at the same time, it's, Denzel said it, the best, not all money is good money. Sometimes
And
you
no
got to
money's
turn down
free.
that.
No
Yeah.
money's free, bro. There's no free money.
Yeah.
And it's free in terms of what happens after the fight, and it's not free in terms of the future of the sport, right?
You look at the UFC, like the UFC, yeah, it's great. It does put on, some quality fights. But at the end of the day, it's like, hey, if you don't fight for us, then, get the fuck on. Right. And if you're an MMA fighter who doesn't fight for the UFC, you're essentially broke because you can't get deals and things like this to,
And by the way, if you're in the UFC, you might be broke because you're
right.
not getting the full value of your fight. You're getting what the UFC dictates you get. And so, like Sean said, the 10 biggest gates in combat sports are all boxing. How are we going to pretend like our system isn't getting the fighters the value of their labor?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the boxing league or again, doing this whole monopoly thing. And I do think that there are enough loopholes to make this not happen. But again, at the same time, that there, when you have an endless amount of money, you never know.
Listen, it's a great time. As much as we're talking about, and I'm not saying all this to be negative, right? I've been involved in this sport for 20 years. Nobody's going to kill boxing. I'm not saying that either. But this would be a great time for the other powers that be in boxing, the people that run the sanctioning bodies, Top Rank, Al Heyman, Eddie Hearn, for these guys to really go out of their way to make big, meaningful fights separate from this entity and to promote the hell out of it and to make a quality boxing product that these guys then have to jump into the market and compete.
Couldn't have said it better, my brother. We'll see if they do, though.
We'll see, man. But one thing we know, we'll be here.
All of it, the whole way. it'll be interesting no matter what happens to see what happens, right? Like I know that's really vague, but it really is. No matter what happens, it's going to be entertaining.
Nibs, as is tradition, this has been a hell of an episode. Thanks to everybody that's in the chat right now. And if you have any questions, drop them in the next couple of minutes before we sign off. But we have a tradition on our show, and we will be keeping that tradition today, Nibs. Talk about the importance of supporting local boxing in your communities.
Look, man, we talked about him at the beginning of the hour, and I'll talk about it again. The state of Nebraska has no professional sports team. They have nobody really to root for other than the Cornhuskers. They get a guy. Again, Nebraska is not known for boxing. Omaha is not known for much. This guy put Omaha on his back, but make no mistake, they showed up and supported for him the entire way, and their support is now being able to say, hey, we might not have much here in Nebraska, but we got Bud Crawford, right? And we got Bud Crawford from day one. We didn't get Bud Crawford just when he started getting popular. People were supporting him. He said this story before. Even when he was, in youth football, people were supporting him. When he was first starting out in boxing and didn't have much to know what he was doing, people supported him. He's homegrown, right? And now look at it. He now gets to come back and say, and he's repped his city hard, right? Because of the support that was given to him. So just because you're not in a place, right, that might be traditionally boxing, right? Like you don't have to be from New York, you don't have to be from LA, Texas, Chicago, one of these big cities. You don't have to be from a big city or a place that's again known for boxing to show up and show out for your boxers. I was watching some fights, last year in Minnesota. They've got a live, boxing scene out there now. There are guys that are coming out of everywhere. You got fighters from South Dakota. You got fighters from, New Mexico, places that don't necessarily always get the biggest love. But I tell you what, the people in those areas support the shit out of their guy. And then when you get one of the ones, right, you get yourself a Bud Crawford. There's nothing like having local pride and being able to say, hey, I was there when that guy wasn't even considering boxing. I was there when that guy was thinking about being in the NFL someday, right? I was there when. And you know what? Support local boxing, baby.
Simple concept, folks, but it's an important one. Hell of a show, my friend. We'll be back next week.
See you guys.